I was thinking that too, like some of the most memorable and wonderful events of my life were organized in a very haphazard manner, sometimes by myself. And things went wrong, but they still were fantastic events. Whereas like I've been to events that went like clockwork, so well organized, so good, and completely like that left me cold. So like, I guess what would you say is like that thing, that animating thing that like makes it successful, even if the organization fails?
And, like if the speaker was being really genuine. Like I think the moment people can let themselves relax and be a little more transparent and genuine, that can be helpful. But I think the reason why organizing is so important and thinking through the details is it creates the environment that releases the stress that can allow for those genuine moments of like connection and stuff to happen. It doesn't mean like, oh no, you forgot plates, now the event's ruined. Like it'll still be okay, but like, you know,
someone goes and gets the plates, it's fine.
yeah, like, but it can allow there to be less tension that can maybe allow some of that like magic to come through.
Hi, I'm Joe Beal, the founder and CEO of Microcosm Publishing. I'm also the author of A People's Guide to Publishing, which distills what I've learned from selling millions of books over the past 28 years.
I'm Elly Blue, the vice president of Microcosm. We started this podcast to share what we've learned with newer publishers, so you can learn from our mistakes. Or maybe you just want to learn about the publishing industry.
This week, we welcome kind of longtime author with Microcosm, but first-time guest on this program, Alex Ketchum. Like you've kind of actually taken all of your passions and then made them into like what like feels like a logical conclusion, like, you know. So but like let's go back to the beginning. So how and why? I think it started with feminist restaurants, which talk about a passion. How did that start? And then how did you end up getting involved with us?
So I started writing about feminist restaurants actually when I was in the undergrad. I went to Wesleyan University and I was really involved with the school's organic farm, and I founded a living community called Farmhouse, which was for students interested in food politics that still exists today. And I was doing feminist studies and history, and I wanted to bring all those things together. And a friend recommended I check out Bloodroot Feminist Vegetarian Restaurant, which existed from 1977 until basically last week. It closed on December 20th after, you know, almost 50 years, which is wild. And I just got really excited about the topic, and I ended up going to grad school and writing about that history for the Canadian and American feminist restaurants. And I had a friend who said, oh, I want to start a feminist restaurant. And we were chatting, and I was realizing all these problems she was coming up against that were really similar to everything I'd been writing about historically. And I started to write like a whole list of tips and stuff I'd learned from the past. And then I was like, oh, this could be useful for other folks. So I saw the 30-second pitch that y'all have on your website. I think the form's probably changed a little bit, but I filled it out and I was like, this could be a cool zine. And you literally wrote back 20 minutes later and we're like, yes, let's do it. And it felt so encouraging and inspiring. And I ended up just being so excited. I wrote the whole thing up in a couple of days. And it was one of my first ever publications. Like I'd had a couple of academic things and stuff before, but it like I have told so many people how important that has been in my career, because it's helped me like show to other editors and publishers, like, look, someone believed in me and wanted to publish me. And so then they were like, okay, cool. So now we kind of trust that you can turn something in and maybe we'll take a chance on you. And it kind of became something that built upon itself. So actually it was pretty pivotal in my writing career, that publication in 2018. So thank you.
The power of a zine.
Dang. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Didn't see that one coming. Okay. Well, I mean, that's awesome.
I just want to say my 15th birthday party was at Bloodroot. I made my parents and my friends from church camp drive over there, and one of the girls was very surprised to learn it was run by lesbians. And that was my introduction. But I bought a book there that I talk about every chance I get because I'm trying to find it again. It was a self-published book. It had an orange cover, and it was about these two middle-aged lesbians living in upstate New York, and they had weird mystical adventures involving the tarot. So if anyone listening has heard of that book, please let me know. Podcast at microcosmpublishing.com.
Be 35 years ago now. So just
Okay.
probably lots of people hanging out at Bloodroot around that time.
Somebody knows something about that book, I swear.
Well, I don't know. I guess
Yeah.
you have an extensive academic network, so maybe they would be the ones to tap for
I
them.
know. Somebody's wrote their dissertation about it, I'm sure. And I'm sure it was like a printing of 150 copies. And yeah.
I will keep my eyes out for it. And I know someone I could maybe ask, like Margaret Galvin, who writes about kind of queer feminist scenes.
Awesome.
Comics. I feel like maybe she might know.
That Reddit forum, like what's that book Reddit, didn't even help me. My next step is going to be to call a librarian.
Getting serious.
Sorry, I got us completely derailed.
What do you mean? This is what we're here to talk about. Books we were obsessed with 35 years ago.
But anyway, the thing I loved about Bloodroot that really captured my imagination at that time was like, it was about books, but it was also about like so much more. It was about like being yourself, and it was about like having this experience where you're eating delicious food that's vegetarian. That was very important to me. And that's like, you know, served by people who care about the same things you do. I don't know. Nowadays, I feel like that's like almost taken for granted, like when you go to certain kinds of restaurants. But at that time, it seemed really, really radical. And yeah, I was wondering when did you go, and what was your experience, and was that your first feminist restaurant?
Yeah, I mean, it was my first explicitly feminist restaurant. I mean, something that I had to grapple with for a really long time was like how I was going to find a feminist restaurant. And I went with they had to call themselves feminist restaurants, which might seem kind of like a duh moment. But otherwise, I was just being too prescriptive about what I meant by feminist and even what I meant by a restaurant and all these different categories. So I was more interested in seeing what folks meant by it if they call themselves that, rather than saying like, oh, does this anarchist restaurant count as feminist? Does this social justice centered restaurant count as feminist? But I first visited in 2011 and I convinced a friend to drive me over, and it was really nice. And I think I was super awkward and was kind of fangirly. And I remember walking around because it's part bookstore, part, as you were saying, and part restaurant. And I asked a bunch of questions. And then later I went back and interviewed them, and like kind of built up a bit of a relationship with them over the years. When I was leaving to move to Canada, they gave me a box of their letters that they had forgotten or hadn't yet given to Yale University, where their archives are. And I took them with me to Canada and was using them for the project. And then I sent them back, and there are all these kind of thank you cards from these famous feminist and lesbian authors. And it was pretty exciting. So over the years, we continued to correspond, and and it's kind of been this really cool thing. I had told someone about this restaurant and my work on them, and then she got excited and she just made this documentary that's out. So Annie Laurie Madonna. So it's just kind of this cool thing that continued to spiral because like a friend told me, oh, you should check out this place. So it is quite a loss that it's gone, but I mean, everything has to end eventually. And you know, I feel like they were quite successful in changing so many people's lives.
Totally.
Oh, and also, sorry, one other thing. I thought, you know, who might know for the publication you're looking for? The Lesbian Her Story Archives.
Lesbian Her Story Archives. All right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna look them up.
Thank you. Send them an email.
Yeah. I emailed Bloodroot about it. I was like, do you remember this book you had in 1993? And they did not.
I mean, fair.
What? Yeah. Every joke I want to make is not appropriate. But so you then, you know, and I think you said something about like, I think from there, either you or we, or maybe it was so collaborative that you can't really put attribution on it, said, oh, what about if we did like one about organizing events? And then I think originally it was something like feminist events, and then that somehow shifted to inclusive events.
I think, because I think the title of that zine is How Organized Feminist and Inclusive Events, right? And then for the like book title, we went with inclusive events and conferences. So yeah, because I organized so many events, so many. On average, at least like one a week. It's actually
Wow.
wild when I think about it.
Wow.
And it's not technically my job, but it's become a huge part of my job. And I write all these grants because I just really like people having the opportunity to be exposed to different academics, artists, activists. Obviously, people can, occupy multiple roles simultaneously, but I just want to kind of use, especially like our Canadian tax money, basically, to like help share information and bring people together in person, virtually, or hybrid in a variety of forms. And so again, it was one of those things like how the first thing came about where a friend was asking me like questions, or we were chatting about how she could start a feminist restaurant. The thing with the events is that because I organized so many, people would ask me questions and I kept like kind of writing things out. And so then I was like, you know what, I'm going to put this down in a more, systematic way. And then I can just like give them a copy of the zine or tell them to spend a few dollars on it. Uh, you know, and so then that's kind of, so yeah, again, I like wrote and pitched you all. And again, you were really enthusiastic and encouraging. And in that, the zine process had kind of changed a little bit. And there's a bit more editing, which was really helpful. And then, yeah, and that zine has done like quite well, I think. It's really exciting. Whenever I go to different like anarchist or leftist or countercultural or feminist or queer bookstores, I almost always see it. So that's really exciting. And yeah, and then from there, because I've organized a few conferences, but I especially organized in 2024 the Queer Food Conference at Boston University, and it was also online. The next one's actually happening in Montreal this May. But people were like, the day it ended, like it was so much work. It's about 400 hours for me to organize these conferences, like unpaid labor. And it's exhausting and it was exhilarating because people had a great time. But like the next day, people were like, can't wait to see you at the next one. And I was like, okay, like I can maybe do this one more time, but it's very exhausting to do.
Yeah.
And, and then my co-organizer, Megan J. Elias, who's at Boston University, was saying, well, maybe we could write up like a little guide thing. And then I started to just put down notes when everything was fresh in my head after the conference. And I was thinking, oh, this is taking, like, I spent like 2 weeks or so just writing up. And I was like, okay, I need to like make this available to more people, but also like, I'm spending a lot of time on this. So then I pitched you all the zine, and then you wrote back and you were like, yes, let's do a zine, but let's also do a book of putting the stuff together and kind of fleshing it out more. And that's how the book came about, which was really exciting. And because I had the two zines and was still really embedded in doing this work, it was also a fairly quick writing process. And I think I'm also comparing that to my like academic historic writing where like it's, I have to go archives and like it takes much longer. So this is like a really fun kind of writing to do because it feels really practical. And even though it's researched, a lot of it is like based on experience too. So yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
I feel like everywhere I go online, people are talking about how they would rather be getting together in person. And there's sort of like this renaissance of like in-person community happening, like people organizing events, people starting clubs and groups, like, and it's a skill, it's an art form. Like I have organized events myself and I don't anymore because it's so difficult and time consuming. But it's like, and you can kind of tell, like you can walk into any event and you can tell like how the organizing happened. And I just feel that makes me feel really great about putting out your book and your zine, because like more people really want this, and more people, and the more they can learn how to do it before they learn the hard way, the better. How did you get into organizing events? And like, can you tell us some of your lessons learned that you got into that way?
For sure. I'll answer that question, but I also want to say thanks. And also, yeah, I definitely see the surge of people wanting to come together. And also like still the importance of online for folks who are immunocompromised and also just far apart and for a variety of care reasons and stuff like that, of needing to still gather online or hybrid. But yeah, I think, we like, I don't want to speak for everyone, but just like sometimes the oppressiveness of our phones and the internet being everywhere. It's just nice to like be with people outside of kind of this feeling of like capitalism oppressing everything, and you just want to like sit in a circle and have a potluck or go to a concert or something. The way I first got into it, it was actually like really, really early on. It's the nerdiest backstory, I would say, was that in middle school, I went to a middle school where you had to take Latin, and I got really into taking Latin, and I was Latin club president.
Yes.
And and so for in the US, there's this thing called Junior Classics League, which is like different Latin clubs and programs that have Latin. They come together, and there's different levels of these conferences. So I grew up in Southern California, even though I live in Montreal now. And there's this thing called Southern California Regional Amici Madness, which is like called Scram. And it's this like, all day event where there's like chariot races where like trash cans are turned into chariots. And there's this thing called Kertamen, which is like Latin Jeopardy. It's the nerdiest thing. And all the students take these like tests and you get points. It's so nerdy. But I like was really close to my Latin teacher, and he and I and like a couple of other students, we organized it, and 2,000 people came, which was a lot to take on at 12, 13 years old.
Yeah.
And obviously there were like adults involved, but that was like one of the first really big things I did. And then throughout high school, I was on all the dance organizing committees, and I organized a bunch of different fundraisers and battled the bands and stuff like that. And then when I went to university, I organized like the festivals at the farm, like May Day and Farm Fest, pumpkin festivals, and more about the bands. And with the food politics house I mentioned, Farmhouse, I also organized a lot of different events around food politics and brought speakers in. And so it just became this thing I really enjoyed doing. And even my family, like my parents, they're like, it wasn't really where they met, but like my dad used to book like bands and stuff at clubs and used to organize stuff. So I think I was surrounded by folks who did like to organize things and bring people together. So maybe I absorbed some of that. I don't remember there ever being any like lessons given, but I think it was just something I assumed you did as an adult, was you organize community events. And and so I just kept doing it and just found different ways to find little budgets here or there. I would say that I've seen how some people organize events and it's at really different kinds of scales. And I think one of the things with the zine is a lot of like thinking how you can do it on no money or like very little money and do pay what you can scales. Because for me, that's what it's all about, is accessibility. So I think I've kept that throughout, even when there have been abilities for grants and like things to get bigger. I always want to make it so that people who want to attend can attend. So I think that ethos has kind of carried throughout all my organizing.
That's amazing. And I love it. I mean, like, so I grew up in punk rock at a time when, like, before punk broke. And so that was kind of how you did it, was this thing where you're like, okay, well, we're going to do it. There's no money. So you have to figure out how you do it with no money. And then, I think it's actually a better organizing principle, because then if you can do it without resources, I feel like, to be honest, like, money kind of can ruin anything.
Yeah.
Because then you get sort of attached to the budgets. And if you can't make it work on a small scale with no budget, it clouds the ability to not be able to do it on a larger scale with a budget, because it's like you're sort of missing the value proposition of what makes a good event. And then I guess you can respond to that, but then also I'm curious, like, so Elly is obviously like consulting a biased data set. There are people that are online that want to be going to events. Do you find that people at events are talking about how they want to be hanging out online, or do you feel like they also want to go to the next event?
God, I just wish I was looking at my phone right now instead of talking to you.
Like, I'm just looking for an online event.
I would say I'm mostly here for folks who want to like go to online events. At least I usually am finding that discourse also online. And even though I often prefer in-person stuff, like there's a few orgs I follow in different countries or different regions, and I do really like when they have a hybrid option. I know someone who like organizes hybrid stuff. Like on the organizing side, hybrid can be a lot more work and a lot more frustrating, and sometimes feels like it pulls energy away. But I do like having those options, and it does create different forms of accessibility, and also in some ways can take some pressure off because like, oh no, the speaker got stuck in a snowstorm. Like there's a way to make it work.
Our industry is run by billionaires and conglomerates.
At Microcosm, we wanted the freedom to independently sell our books, easily pay royalties, manage our inventory, and understand our business all in one place.
That's why we've been using our own software since 2001.
Now, we want to share it with you.
Working Lit is the only business success software that is created and owned 100% by publishers for publishers.
Join Working Lit and get the agency you need to help your business grow.
Visit workinglit.com to try it for free.
And I think a lot of people also are comforted by the idea of knowing that they could go. Like I find that a lot is people want the links or want the link to the recording, even if they might not ever actually watch it. There's something about that that feels like they're connected to it. In terms of the thing about the budget, I definitely agree. And I think the place that I prioritize first when I do have a budget is trying to pay people for their labor, like instantly. Like when we have no budget and then we're all working on sweat equity, but then the first thing I try to do, I work with a lot of like young people or younger people or students. They're not always actually younger than me, but like in terms of like in my institution, they're like, I'm paid for my job. And so trying to like pay students or pay other folks and also like give really good honorariums. Like that's usually where the budget goes to first and then kind of from there. So trying to keep costs quite low and really centering like what's important. And I also just find that like it can be really, sometimes it can be tricky because as we're feeling more austerity just in general, I would say in Canada and the US, and maybe other listeners are feeling this in other places where they live. And so some of those options for like the free spaces or the low cost spaces, some of those become a bigger pinch, but there's usually some kind of community space where you live that will like have sliding scale or donate space, or you can do some kind of exchange. And I do find that already, like, I don't know, I also just feel more comfortable in spaces like that. And I know that might not be the case for everyone, but I don't know, like businesses or community centers that like put an emphasis on making their space accessible to community groups, just like I personally will probably feel a lot better in that space than in a ballroom of a fancy hotel, for example. But yeah, that's just probably also my own positionality as well.
We talk about that a lot when we're we go to a lot of publishing events and conferences, and a lot of them there is really this sort of like ballroom of fancy hotel seems to be the baseline. Like there's this standard that feels very foreign to us, and then when Joe tries to go in and be like, what if we had a burrito bar instead of catering on white tablecloths? What if people had to arrange their own lodging instead of having it in a conference hotel? People are horrified. It seems very radical. It does seem like there's a cultural divide in events and expectations that I would almost draw the line between like professional and not professional, whatever professional means.
But I think it's your upbringing too.
Yeah.
President of Latin Club, you can maybe speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely some of that's upbringing, so that's just your own values. But I think also too, like for me, if I have a budget and I can pay people or organizations or caterers or like whatever, I want to make sure that the money is going somewhere where it will be amplified in different ways. So it's like, okay, we have a budget, like let me give it to the feminist bookstore. And then I know like they will then use that to subsidize other events for authors who like might not have a budget to do an event. Or like for the queer food conference, like the ones that we're having in May, it's like it's going to queer food businesses, right? Because I want to like have the money supporting the community. It's like, where can the money have the biggest impact? Like, of course, sometimes you might be limited and you might have to go with like a more mainstream business for some kind of thing. But in general, just like being really intentional about where the money is going, I think is quite key. And then, yeah, some of it's upbringing, some of it's just like where you feel comfortable. I don't really feel that comfortable in big ballrooms, but yeah. But it's kind of funny because you'd have a lot of assumptions about what Latin Club is like, but it was a bunch of teenagers in t-shirts. I don't know. It was a silly time, but yeah.
I love this origin story.
Yeah, and because it's like, the dichotomy of that versus like what you value now, you know?
Yeah, but I mean, I'm also a historian. Like, I love the past, and I also love languages, and yeah, and it was still like at its heart was bringing people together and like education and knowledge sharing, and yeah, a lot of schools in California, like public schools, have strong Latin programs, and that organization gives a lot of like college scholarships too. So I think that's also a big draw.
I love that. Shout out to the Latin programs of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that.
I was not expecting to talk about Latin clubs so much, but yeah.
Let's talk about organizing some more, because I think about this all the time. What can you talk about sort of like how you talk about it seems to have changed over the years? You know, you started out feminist restaurants, and now like I'd say the word feminism has kind of morphed and changed and maybe been a little bit co-opted. Like, do you still use that word, or have you changed how you talk about the same concepts?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I still use feminism a lot. I teach in a feminist studies program. I mean, technically, we're the Institute for Gender, Sexuality, and Feminist Studies, and it's the Gender, Sexuality, Feminist, and Social Justice Studies program. We love our acronyms. Yeah, and there's also graduate option in gender and women's studies. Lots of acronyms to remember, and then we have the French versions as well. Because I'm in Montreal, but I would say feminism to me, it like, while like TERFs or farts, whatever terminology you want to use about people who are appropriating the term feminism for trans exclusion, while their discourse can sometimes dominate certain like media cycles and stuff, I still think feminist values are very important. I would say that in my work, I've actually shifted a lot more to like emphasizing the queer part of my work, even though like my feminist restaurant research, like many of those places were run by lesbians and women who today might identify as queer women, or over time even non-binary folks. And like over time, more of the spaces were explicitly trans inclusive, though some have histories of trans exclusion, which is awful. But I would say that one of the reasons I think a lot of my work has moved towards like emphasizing queerness and kind of queer history too is partly where my work was accepted, like my academic work was accepted within kind of like social justice and activist circles and like artist circles. Like my work as feminist work was really accepted, but in the feminist academic spaces, I did find that there were some like older white women historians who were pretty gatekeepy, and which was really a shame. And I felt like I wasn't necessarily getting like as much support for my work. But when I would present at the Queer History Conference, which is now called the Queer and Trans History Conference, but was always Trans History too, which is a really cool conference if folks are interested. I just found so much more support, and you would have folks like Susan Stryker and like, you know, big name historians sitting at the table with undergrads and librarians, and you would have like, it wasn't there's at any conference there's going to be some folks who are like maybe not the nicest, but I would say that overall there was just a lot more support, and everyone's like, okay, our work is marginalized, so how can we like bring each other up? And that's kind of, I think, why a lot of my work has shifted to being more explicitly queer, while everything is still quite feminist and uses feminist research methodologies, and I still really care about feminism as a term, and it's still really important to me. But I'd say like maybe that's, if people notice a bit of a shift, it's partly like, and it's also just kind of where publishers were interested in supporting my work too. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, and that's, I mean, so I've seen you acknowledge, and I mean, well, you said many, many things that I appreciate today, but I've seen you say online that one of the things that you really like appreciate after like going through the publishing like paper mill is that the things that you published with us are $5, you know, which is kind of, and you know, we've seen the benefits of that too. Like we get, probably partly because you're Canadian, but when we started working with our Canadian distributor, they were like, oh, don't worry about the zines, don't worry about like the sidelines, like let's just focus on new releases. And then it was like every week we were getting reorders for your your feminist events, and so we were like, that thing you said, it doesn't seem to be quite accurate. It's like, and then, because it's like in there, and it's the same thing you're talking about. It's like, they're not gatekeeping per se, but they're coming at it from like maybe an outdated methodology of like, this is what sells and this is what stores are interested in. And, so the idea that like this $5 publication is just like, has legs and legs and legs, but I think to your point, when you come from academics, it's very hard to convince your friend to buy your book when it's $200.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like, so I feel like, again, something that's always been really important to me is because, my mom left high school at age 15 and like not, the first woman in my family to like graduate university and go on to do my master's and PhD. And for me, it's just been really important to like continue to share information with my family and other people in my life. Not everyone has the ability to go to university and stuff. Not everyone wants to either, but for folks who want to, there's just a lot of barriers to access. And so it's always just been part of my ethos to continue to like share things. And so with every bit of work I do, I either have a low cost version or something free online. So with my academic books, Ingredients for Revolution and Engage in Public Scholarship, there's open access versions. Nice. Which for folks listening, it means you can read it for free online. So I've been able to work with my press, Concordia University Press, to write grants and use grant funds to make that a possibility. My forthcoming book, Digital Queers and High-Tech Gaze with MIT Press, will also have an open access version. And then with Arsenal Pulp Press for the Queers at the Table, and they were great to work with, their Canadian press, we were able to keep the price point really low. And that was one of the reasons why we went with them too, because I want people who are like in our queer community, right? Queer communities oftentimes are quite marginalized, don't have as much access to money. I want people to be able to buy it. I want also like it just to be something that like can actually, be bought by libraries as well. And I just don't want cost to be the barrier to information. I realize that publishing has its own prices and I want people to be paid for their labor, but I'm always trying to figure out a way to have some free or low cost version of the work.
Yeah. And it is possible, everybody. Publishers, it's possible.
Yeah, it's like you have to kind of recognize the size and the scope of the audience and not make it something that just goes in academic libraries.
Exactly. And the other thing too, like you were saying, like with the zine and like how it is distributed in Canada too, is that, or the zines, is that like one thing, a lot of Canadian bookstores, I think there's like certain tax things. I don't fully understand it, so I don't want to say something incorrect, but there's like, they're supposed to, or they get benefits if they have a certain percentage of their bookstore with Canadian authors and also Quebecois authors. I'm in Montreal. I mean, how one is defined as Quebecois is always a contentious thing, but I'm a Montrealer. So they can like put the like fleur de lis and the Canadian maple leaf like on the books when they're like advertising them. And then also like Le Gouillon, which is a queer feminist bookstore here in Montreal, like they've always really emphasized that they have stickers and buttons and lots of zines because they want people to be able to come in the space and feel like, okay, well, I can buy something, like, because a lot of times people want to go to bookstores and like browse for a long time, but they might not have the money to actually buy a book, but they feel awkward if they can't, like, because of our capitalist system, they feel weird if they can't buy anything. So they're like, okay, well, having something for a couple of bucks, they feel like they can like contribute.
The amazing Always Here bookstore in Portland is the same way. It's like very heavy on the stickers and their merchandise throughout the store, like in and amongst the books. And I never thought of it before as being super queer to have stickers at your bookstore, but it is. Good work, booksellers.
Yeah.
I have a more sort of, I guess, audience pertinent question for you. The dog is kind of sitting on me in a funny way. Come on, Vern, let's sit up here. Show your ears to everybody. There they are. There's some little ears.
You can see my dog Sprout in the background on the floor there.
Sprout. Yeah. There's some little legs to go with the ears. Yeah, we'll make a full dog.
He's a 75 pounds husky mix.
Old Sprout. So a lot of our audience is publishers and authors, and book events is something that is on a lot of people's mind. Book tours, book events, the landscape around this has changed so much. It's actually really hard to break even on a book event with book sales. A lot of bookstores won't do them, or they'll charge the authors to do them now. And we no longer support, I mean, we'll like support them emotionally, but we don't offer like as much financial and logistical support for authors doing book events, because we like will send 40 copies of the book to the store and get 36 of them back the next week, and it just doesn't make sense for anybody. And do you have any advice for how to fix this? Because we know people love books and want to go meet authors. Tell us how to fix it.
Okay, for sure. So I wrote a blog post that I can send you all if you do like links in the show notes, but how to organize a book tour.
Nice.
And I, for all of my like books and different publications, I do promos. I've actually been thinking of like how to promote this Microcosm book, because it's kind of like a meta thing of having like a book event about how to organize events. But still thinking about that. But so I think a big part of it is thinking of how you can create collaborations. So for the Queers at the Table, so that book is a little different because there are 38 contributors. And so I've organized now, I used to say it was 17 events, but we're getting close to, I think, 21 events over the course of this year. And each one brings together different contributors. Some are online, some are in person, and all of them are partnered with a community organization around different themes of the book. So those community orgs are bringing in their different audiences. And then obviously the online one, there's links. But we've done pretty well. Like our book launch event, I think 35 or 37 copies of the book were sold.
Okay, that's
and like
pretty
over
good.
50 people came, which was like pretty wild. So that helped. But again, because there are different authors and like contributors, so they could bring their friends. I think a lot of it is finding different ways to collaborate with different orgs. I think my favorite book launch I ever had, or like book event that I did, was for Ingredients for Revolution. So that's the history of feminist restaurants book. But a lot of that history also includes like the history of these restaurants hosting events. And so they like touring musicians in the women's music movement would come to these events, and that was code for like lesbian music. Anyways, so I also volunteer with the organization Rock Camp for Girls, Non-Binary, and Trans Youth. And so what I did was, we have this really cool venue in Montreal called Turbo House, which is like a punk space that does like all this really great stuff for the community. And it was a Tuesday night in January, and Sergio, the person who runs it, was like, yes, you can use the space for free. And so it was pay what you can, sliding scale, recommended $10. And it was like a donation for Rock Camp. And so I had my friends who are like rock camp counselors. So they're musicians, and they did covers of different like women's music groups from the 70s and 80s. And then in between each set, I gave little bits of book talks about like sections from the book. And then I also invited like one of my grad students who like writes about like the history of like Montreal queer disco and like the Montreal queer music scene to also give a talk. My editor from the press was there at a table, and like where the merch tables are for bands normally, and was selling like copies of my Microcosm zines, like, and also like the book. And like over 90 people came out. It was a Tuesday night in January.
What?
And like we raised $900 for Rock Camp. And it was just like amazing. And I like basically got all these folks who would never go to an academic book talk, but they came to this like show. They learned about this history. They also like, it got to support grad students. It raised money for kids in the community. And and if people were buying drinks, they're buying it from Turbo House. So that also brought money to this really cool venue. It like puts up musicians for free. They like let them stay in this apartment above the venue at night. Like it was just like, and like stuff like that like it requires like making use of different networks. But again, all of it was to like support different people and bring other voices forward. So I think if you can like tap into your different networks of connection, like that is what makes like events more successful. I've also had like book talks at bookstores where like 3 people showed up, and like that's a bummer. And sometimes that happens, but like sometimes there's a snowstorm, or sometimes like the transit's on strike, or like whatever, right? Like there's things you can't control, but a lot of it is like publicity in advance, connecting with folks in different cities, getting other people to like tap into their networks, and then also doing like exchanges too when people are coming to your city. But and I usually try to yes, there's the book launches, but I also try to like anytime I travel, like if I'm going to a conference or to give like an academic talk, I also try to pair it with like a free talk I give at like a local bookstore or library. And I actually learned to do that from what academics were doing in the 70s, where they would get like the women's college to like pay for a talk, and then they do a free event at like the feminist restaurant or like the lesbian bar.
We built this software from scratch to solve our own problems starting in 2001.
It's not only the reason for our survival, but the reason we've been a Publishers Weekly fastest growing publisher 3 years in a row.
Now we want to share it with you.
Join Working Lit and get back the agency to understand your publishing business, market and sell your books, and painlessly pay royalties.
Working Lit, doing the math for publishers.
Visit workinglit.com to give it a try for free.
Always am trying to like figure out different ways to bring people together and see places. And yeah, it's overall led to pretty good things. A lot of times for those like smaller events, like bookstores might buy like 5 copies or have people pre-order and stuff. So I don't think there's been a lot of losses. And I try to do like a lot of publicity and support for that space before, during, after, and for years to come. So it creates this like network.
Nice.
I feel like we should probably have you do a zine about how to organize a book event and or tour.
Oh, yeah.
If you'd be into that.
Yeah, I would be into that. That'd be really fun, especially because I have this like blog post as a template. Because one of my colleagues was like, how do you get all these people to your events? I think so. Again, a lot of it is just like, you know, connecting with people, which that is its own skill set. But you know, you can be, I would say I'm a bit socially awkward, so you can still connect with people if you're like me. But you know, I think a lot of it is just being really transparent. I think the other thing that makes me not feel weird in asking for these things is because all the things I'm doing, I'm like giving back, right? Like it's like people buy my book is very supportive of me, but like I'm not making a lot of money on my book. Like, you know, like that's not really what it's about. It's about like sharing information and connecting with people. And so I think that also, and because I try to have free versions or sliding scale or cheap versions and stuff of my work online or in other formats, I think it makes me feel not that people, if their books do cost more money or whatever, that they should feel bad about it, but like it takes away that feeling of like feeling like an ickiness about it. But I don't know if you know Beth Pickens. She wrote the book Make Your Art No Matter What. She has some zines about like on making art during fascism. She's great. She has like podcasts and stuff like that. And she said this line in one of her podcasts, or maybe it was on Sagittarian Matters with Nicole J. Georges. And she said, you know, it's actually more like egocentric to think that you shouldn't have to promote your projects, because that's assuming that people know everything you're doing, right? That actually, and you actually like owe it to the project to like share it and like all the other people that have contributed. So I don't know, that has worked for me in helping me get over the fear of like asking for help or asking people to use their spaces or venues and stuff. And then when I do have money for places that have given me space for free, then I try to get that money to them when I get like a grant and stuff.
Nice.
I love that. You know, there's like so many threads that. So Nicole and I went on this tour many 20 some years ago together, and it was like we kind of did that same thing where we got funding from public libraries. The band Harry and the Potters tipped me off that libraries have funding. And then so what we did is we would do a library show, and then we would do like a community center show in the same city, like, but across town, because it was like and sometimes even if it's in the same neighborhood, different people come. But then the thing that really struck me, I mean, Nicole is really good at like creating a mood and you know, had a lot of talents that the rest of us didn't have and maybe don't have, but was very good at then like the whole thing was an experience. And I think that's sort of what's lost in, you know, people think like I'm making an event to promote my book and I made the book and that was such an undertaking, that they forget to make the event an experience. So the idea of like going to the bookstore and listening to somebody read from the book, it just feels very like safe and controlled, I think, in a way that just isn't fundamentally interesting, or it like feels like homework, I guess is like one way I would put it, you know?
Yeah, I get that. I think part of it too. I don't sometimes like bookstores will ask me to actually read a section, and for me that is like something I tend not to do. I tend to just like describe parts of it because I feel like I can be more animated, and sometimes I get like worried I'll like stumble over words, especially if I've read them so many times while editing and stuff. I get really in my head about it and like my pronunciation of stuff. So yeah, I do think like again also to make it feel like more living too, if there's someone like in that city or town that like also somehow connects to it too, that you can bring in either to like moderate or also to share some of their work too, so they bring their friends and you're uplifting different voices. And then it also doesn't feel like if you're going to different towns, like it makes every event a little fresher and newer and gives you something to bounce off of. Yeah, I'm just into like having different ways to like anytime you have even a little bit of like media attention or power or anything, to use that to spotlight other folks. You know, like any time that like I can like mention other folks or bring their work in and stuff, I think that is something that helps. But yeah, I don't want to say that this isn't time consuming or work. So much of my time is spent organizing events. And sometimes it's exhausting, like with the queers at the table stuff. Like, I think I was a little bit ambitious, but I keep adding more events because I'm like, oh, this museum is doing this thing and maybe we can do this. And like, I just get really excited about it. And sometimes I'm like, no, you're tired and you're also organizing this huge international conference right now and working on like other book projects and promoting other things. But I just get really excited about being able to connect with people and like do different kinds of like in French, there's this idea of like animation. Like I feel like it doesn't translate quite as much in like English, but like you have these like animators that like animate different things. And I feel like there's just all these cool potentials to animate like a different connections between like the work and other things going on in that city, town, wherever.
Oh, I love that term. Thank you for
Mhm.
teaching us French.
Yeah.
How would you say it in French?
Animateur.
Oh, okay. Animateur.
It's animator, yeah.
Pretty exact. Well, do you have any more questions or should we?
Oh, I have questions all day long. So yeah, it is so like someone's a first time event organizer. What's the most important thing they need to know?
Good one.
Okay. Yeah. So I think the goal of the event, where it's going to be like the real basics of like timing, like that kind of like figuring out those like really basic things. I think not trying to be too ambitious the first time. Like, you know, even if you're imagining like a 15 or 20 person event, that can be great because you can learn a lot from it. And also to be gentle with yourself, that you'll make mistakes. I know you said like main thing to know, but also to always have like masking tape, scissors, some Sharpies, pens, and paper in your bag, and like some chargers and extension cords. Like those are just like some go-tos that like you will need to put up a sign somewhere. Like that will just save you a lot of stress. Just always have that
Great
with
tip.
you. And yeah, that is a big thing of just having masking tape. Yeah, like so many times I'm like, oh yeah, people might not know which of the two doors to go through, and then last minute you're like, okay, I'm going to run over and do that. Like there will be last minute, even if you're super planned, there will still be something last minute. And like, you know, you can maybe start with something with like a community that you feel will be less judgmental or more supportive. Like even just, you know, it is also an event to like host people at your house for a potluck or apartment or like in a neighborhood thing, right? Like you can learn lessons in those like more casual social things that help you learn other things. Like, oh, it'd be a good idea to bring like backup serving utensils, or like, oh, don't put like the spoons and forks or chopsticks like at the front before people pick what they're going to eat. Put it at the end so it flows and you don't have like a traffic jam. Just like things like that that you start to pick up over time. But I mean, I still make mistakes even after organizing all these things, and like sometimes the tech just glitches or whatever. I organize things that I want to see happen, right? Is that like for folks listening, like you're like, oh, I really wish we had a zombie parade like this other city. It's like, well, you can do it. Like make it happen. Like you can figure out the thing. Like when you want to see something, make it. But but it does likely mean that you will be experiencing that zombie parade quite differently than the people attending. And so that can be sometimes hard, as sometimes I like with the upcoming conference, you know, I was just like making the whole schedule yesterday. I'm like, oh, I want to go to this workshop and this. I'm like, no, Alex, you will be running between the different rooms and like doing like making sure that like the things are going. But I did put like one workshop at a time slot where I'm like, okay, that's at the end of the day. I think I'll actually be able to go. And I selfishly put it at that time because I really wanted to go to it. So, you know, but like it's just going to be a really different experience for you. And there might be a feeling too where you're like, I can't wait for this to be over because I'm so tired because I spent so much time thinking about it. But there's something like I feel like the things that feel satisfying that bring me back to it as a person who organizes is I get really excited about the idea of it. I actually do enjoy those details up to a certain point. And then knowing afterwards that it's happened, there's this feeling of satisfaction and seeing like how it's like helped other people connect. So those are things that bring me to it. But sometimes I do wish I could just like sometimes I just go to an event and just like I can just like be here and experience it.
Yeah.
And it's awesome.
Uh-huh.
So,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so in again, Nicole and I and our friend Eleanor, confusingly a different Eleanor, we founded an event called the Portland Zine Symposium 25 years ago. And it was similarly, yeah, like I didn't count on the fact that like you don't have time to go to the programming because you're the one that everybody runs up to and is like, where's the microphone? I lost my pen, or why are there no forks? Or, you know, like that becomes your job. And then after 5 years, I was kind of like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm done. And all three of us actually like had resigned at that point. And young people kind of came in, and now it's in its 26th year and they still do it, which is like completely shocking. And, you know, and it has no like, you know, we like created a rubric and that, but like, there's no advisory board, there's no like, they just do the event. And it's, you know, like people that are young enough to be our children, which is like really, really awesome, you know?
Yeah.
But again, and maybe that was just like a time and a place, but like, I don't know, it was weird even like the second year because like 1,500 people came and we were like, for this, like, this is just, we don't have a budget, you know? And I don't know. And I guess it's like the thing where like at the time it didn't feel special, or, you know, it did, but it didn't, you know, like it's like nobody had an ego about it. And then I don't know, I guess that's the thing where like, so like what is the thing that makes something like an event have life after the founders go, or they don't have life for it anymore?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a tricky question because it's like this idea of like when to sunset a project yourself or when to pass it on and how to share. I think there's a few things that like if you want it, like if you're imagining it living beyond you, if you have this like grander vision for it beyond you, there are ways that you can definitely like help foster that, right? Of like writing down like here's the protocols we followed and so forth, and like literally even having a binder that you pass on or something like that, or like, you know, a computer file or whatever, although I actually think having the printed version is safer, or do both. Duplication's great, but having that can help. But you also, I feel like, you know, it's also okay if no one else wants to take it on, right? Like just because I had a vision of it, like that doesn't mean that someone else is necessarily going to have that much passion for it as well. And I'm also okay with that. I'm okay now with ephemerality and things ending and things just being this one-time thing, because you might not see how it inspires someone to do something else, maybe like a couple years later in a different form. But sometimes, like, you know, with the Zine Fest, I think, you know, there's models of that in other cities and towns. There's also like, there was obviously a need in Portland for that. There were other people that were excited about it. And so they saw the model that you created and were able to carry that forward. So sometimes I think it's also hitting that thing where it's like you're filling like a need and it's like niche enough that people will care about it and make it continue, but like not so niche that you're the only one who will care about that. And I do sometimes think that, you know, if there's like this kind of like product that is hard to like share otherwise, that can also lead to it, right? Because you also have then all the other zine-sters and small press publishers and, you know, independent artists and stuff feeling invested in having that space to share their work. So I think that can also like lead to it where sometimes like some things I organize, I'm like, okay, no one else is going to like do it again exactly the same. And that's okay. And I think that's the other thing too, is if you go the next year as an attendee and you're not in control of it, to just be like, it's okay that it's different than what I would have done, you know? Like that's okay. Sometimes like that like loss of control can be hard, but you know, trying to make yourself available to the next organizers and answer questions. Yeah, I do a lot of like meetings with folks who are organizing like different conferences and stuff. I'm like, here's what I do. Use what's useful for you, you know, and try to let go and not be judgmental or try, you know, like it's not my business how they do it. I can just share what I know and what worked for me. And I think that's also what brings me to writing zines is I want to just save people some of the trouble of having to learn some of the stuff. But like, you know, if you read my zine or my book, like take what's useful for you, ignore the rest, like figure out what works for you. But these are things that I've tried over like hundreds of different events, and it's been a template that works well with how my brain works and my workflows and my schedule.
Real quick, what's next for you? And yeah.
Yeah, I would say, okay, so big things that are upcoming. Queer Food Conference, it's going to be in Montreal, May 1st through 3rd. It's hybrid, so you can register online. Like we're going like around January 15th, we'll put the links up. My book, Digital Queers and High Tech Gaze, will be coming out sometime within the next year-ish. The book is done. I just don't have the publication date. And I'm now working on a new project about histories of queer people in space programs, like international space programs. So that's like the next kind of like ongoing 5-year project.
That's fun. I'm excited to do that.
Yeah. And of course, because I wanted to leave the best for last, the new publication of my book with Microcosm coming out very soon.
How to Organize Inclusive Events and Conferences by Dr. Alex Ketchum.
Mm-hmm.
Get it where you can, or get the zine.
You were not even a doctor when you began working with us, and look how far you've come.
It's true. Yeah, I've got tenure now.
Ooh,
whoa.
Yes.
All right. Look at our authors moving up in the
A
world.
pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for
Thank you
coming
so much.
on.
This was really fun.
Thanks for joining us once again.
Please send your questions to podcast@microcosmpublishing.com so we can answer them on future episodes.
And please give us 5 stars on iTunes and everywhere else that podcasts are reviewed.
You can find us on the internet at microcosm.pub,
On Twitter at Microcosm.
on Facebook at Microcosm Publishing,
On Instagram at Microcosm_pub.
and here in Portland, Oregon on North Williams Avenue.
Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful week.